There is a school in the heart of Seoul that measures everything, every student ranked, every score posted, every breath accounted for. Hansung High School does not ask if you are happy. It asks only one thing: where do you stand? And in the autumn of third year, when the banners read 68 days until the Sunoon, that question hung over every hallway, every classroom, every desk like whether that refused to pass. The Sunoon, the college scholastic ability test, a single examination that lasts one day and decides, in the particular mythology of Korean education, the entire shape of a future, universities, careers, which city you will live in, who you will become, all of it threaded through a number that gets assigned to you on a Tuesday in November. Students had been preparing for this exam since they were old enough to understand what preparation meant. Some of them had been tutored since middle school. Some of them had not taken a vacation in 2 years. Some of them had alarm clocks set for 4 in the morning and fell asleep at their desks and did not consider this unusual. This was the world Hansung High School occupied, and inside that world, among those students, at the very sharpest point of all that pressure, sat Jiwoo. He had stood at the top for 3 years, not because he loved it, not because the view was beautiful from up there, but because standing anywhere else was simply not something his world permitted. Every morning, a black car dropped him at the school gates. Every morning, students moved out of his way without being asked. Every morning, he walked through those doors with his earphones and his expression sealed shut, like a letter no one was allowed to open. He was the son of director Kim Hyun-sik, the man who built Kim Academy, the man whose name was on the scholarship plaques, the man who believed that a child's worth could be measured precisely due to decimal places, in a way that left no room for the parts of a person that did not fit neatly into categories. Jiwoo had learned to believe that too, or at least, he had learned to perform believing it, which, after enough years, starts to feel like the same thing. He had been number one so long that the number no longer felt like an achievement. It felt like a cage made of gold, which is still a cage. No matter how much it shines. There were things about Jiwoo that the ranking board did not know, that he used to read novels until he was 13 and stopped because they did not appear on the Sunoon, that he sometimes stood at his bedroom window very late at night and looked at the city lights and felt something he had no name for, a kind of hunger that no exam score had ever satisfied, that the only person who had ever made him feel like a person rather than a result was his friend Minjin, who was funny and warm and running his own silent war between who he was and who his family needed him to be. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The story does not begin with who Jiwoo was before, it begins with who he was about to become. On the morning our story begins, the autumn was crisp and sharp, the kind of cold that reminds you that you are alive whether you want to be reminded or not. And at the bus stop near the school gate, a girl was running. She was breathless and late and clutching a crumpled transfer form, her backpack bouncing behind her, her hair escaping every attempt to keep it contained. She had exactly 4 minutes before the school gate closed, and she had already decided she was going to make it, because Park Sora had made a habit, in her 18 years on this earth, of doing things she was not supposed to be able to do. She had come from Jinju, a city far from Seoul, where the school she had attended was smaller and kinder and less obsessed with rankings, but also far less equipped to send her where she needed to go. Her mother was sick, the treatments were expensive. The scholarship at Seoul National University covered tuition, living costs, and medical support for dependents. If you qualified, if you scored high enough, if you landed in the top 3 nationally on an exam that 200,000 students took every year, Sora knew all of this. She had known it for 2 years. She had built her life around it the way an engineer builds a bridge, one calculation at a time. Nothing left to chance, nothing wasted. She barely missed the door of Jiwoo's car. He watched her disappear through the school gates at full speed and raised one eyebrow by exactly 1 millimeter, which was, for Kim Jiwoo, a significant display of emotion. He did not know her name yet. He did not know that she was about to sit 2 rows ahead of him in homeroom, or that she would take the library table he had quietly claimed as his own for 2 years, or that she would ask him why a formula worked when the entire world only ever asked him how. He did not know any of that yet. He only knew that someone had run past him like the world was ending and it had not stopped for a single second on his behalf. He found that, without entirely meaning to, slightly interesting. Inside classroom 3B, Sora stood at the front with her transfer papers and her nervous smile and her extraordinary notebook tucked under her arm. 30 students looked at her with the particular exhausted curiosity of people who are drowning in exam pressure and mildly grateful for any distraction at all. She bowed. She smiled. She found a seat next to the boy in the middle row who introduced himself as Choi Minjin and promised to be mostly harmless, which turned out to be almost entirely true. Minjin had a quality that was genuinely rare in Hansung High School. He was actually interested in other people, not competitively interested, not strategically interested, but simply curious about who they were. He had grown up alongside Jiwoo, had watched him become the number his father needed him to be, and had made a quiet private decision to be as different from that as possible. This made him popular in a way that had nothing to do with rankings, which Hansung High School found faintly baffling but could not quite argue with. And at the back of the room, behind the number 1 plaque on his desk, Kim Jiwoo read ahead in his textbook and did not look up once. Sora noticed the plaque. She noticed the boy behind it. She noticed the way no one spoke to him and the way he did not seem to notice that either. She thought, quietly, that being number 1 looked a great deal lonelier than she had always imagined. Then she opened her notebook, uncapped a blue pen, and got to work, because Sora had not come all the way from Jinju to sit in the back and be impressed by someone else's loneliness. The first mock exam results came back on Friday. The class crowded round the board. Names and numbers, descending order. Jiwoo at the top. As always, Yuna at second, Han Yuna, who had been chasing that first place for 2 years with the focused energy of someone who has decided that a goal is not optional, and at the very bottom of the list, in small and ambiguous ink, Park Sora, number 30. Last place, someone whispered. A few poorly hidden smiles. Minjin appeared at her elbow and said something kind about first exams and nerves, and Sora thanked him with a small smile and did not let her expression change by a single degree. She was not surprised. The exam format at Hansung was entirely different from what she had studied in Jinju. The question structures, the time allocation, the particular tricks the examiners used. She had walked into it without the map. She knew that. She had already started drawing the map. And then Kim Jiwoo walked past the board, glanced at her result, and said, without breaking his stride, that the Sunoon was in 68 days and last place did not have that kind of time. He kept walking. Sora stared at the space where he had been. She was not hurt. She was not discouraged. She was, if anything, annoyed, the particular sharp annoyance of someone who knows that a person is right but wishes, very much, that they were not. That evening she was in the library when he walked in. She was at the table he always used, which she did not know was the table he always used. He stood in the doorway for a moment, clearly considering his options. Then he sat at the next table. Neither of them said anything for a while. They simply worked. The library was quiet around them, the way libraries are quiet. Not empty silence but full silence, the kind made of rustling pages and thinking. And then Sora muttered a formula under her breath, working through a problem in section 4, and Jiwoo said, without looking up, that she was applying the formula for closed systems to an open variable set. And she checked her paper and checked his answer and discovered, with the kind of irritation that lives very close to gratitude, that he was correct. She thanked him. He said nothing, but he did not leave. This was the beginning, though neither of them knew it yet. 2 weeks later, the second mock results came back. Sora was number 22, 8 places up in 14 days while working every evening until 11 at night and sleeping what she described to Minjin as efficiently, which was the most optimistic word she knew. Teacher Beck told her it was exceptional. She told Teacher Beck it was not good enough. Teacher Beck Soonwon was not like most of the teachers at Hansung High. He had come to teaching from a genuine belief that students were human beings first and scores second, which made him an idealist inside a machine that did not particularly value idealism. But he stayed. He stayed because he thought, on the best days, that maybe one teacher who saw students clearly was worth more than the whole system trying not to. He had noticed Sora the moment she arrived, not her rank, not her scores, the notebook, asterisk. The extraordinary, color-coded, question-filled notebook that she carried everywhere and consulted the way other students consulted their phones. He had seen students work hard before. He had not often seen a student work with such joy about the questions themselves. He kept watching, and what he saw, over the weeks that followed, was 2 students doing something the school had not designed for and could not quite account for, actually teaching each other. At the back of the crowd around the results board, Jiwoo looked at Sora's number, and something in his face moved. Just slightly, just for a moment, something that in a less careful person might have been called impression. The next afternoon he sat across from her in the library, without asking, and told her he wanted to make a deal. He needed a study partner who asked questions he did not think of. She asked him many questions. He had noticed. He would teach her how the exam system actually worked, not the textbook version, the real version, and she would make top 10. Sora looked at him across the table and said she did not want top 10. He looked at her for the first time like she had said something genuinely unexpected. She wanted top 3. She said, nationally. She needed a full scholarship to SNU, that was the number, and she was not interested in numbers that fell short of it. He said it was not possible in 60 days. She said it was a good thing she was used to doing impossible things. There was a pause between them that lasted several seconds. It was the kind of pause that contains more information than most conversations. He looked at her across the table, at the certainty in her face, the absolute refusal to be limited by someone else's estimate of what was realistic, and something shifted in the careful architecture of his expression. Then he extended his hand and said, "Same time tomorrow." She shook it once, formally. Neither of them let go immediately, and so the sessions began. 1 hour every afternoon before her shift. In the corner of the library at the table that had quietly become theirs, he taught with precision, no warmth, no performance, just clarity, no excess words, no encouragement, just a clean straight line between problem and solution. She asked why after every how, and he answered, and then answered deeper, because she kept going, and he kept finding that the deeper answers interested him in ways he had not expected. The first time she pushed back on his explanation, actually argued with him, calmly and specifically, about whether his interpretation of a passage was the only valid one. He stared at her for a full 3 seconds. No one argued with Jiwoo, not about academics. This was his domain, his certainty, the one place the world had always deferred to him completely. She was right. He acknowledged it without ceremony. She moved on without making anything of it, and something in the room shifted, subtly and permanently, towards something more like equals. She color-coded everything. He caught himself, 2 weeks in, color-coding his own notes. He noticed. He did not mention it. Neither did she. One evening she fell asleep at the table. He noticed when her pen stopped moving. He looked at her for a moment, at the way the exhaustion had finally caught up with her, softening the determination she wore all day like armor. He closed her book carefully. He put his jacket over her shoulders. He sat back down and continued studying. When she woke, flustered and embarrassed, the jacket was folded neatly on the chair and he was already gone. They did not talk about it, but the next session, she brought the coffees, Americano, no sugar, the same thing he ordered at the vending machine. He paused when he saw the second cup. He sat down. He took the coffee without comment. It was, for the two of them, a very loud conversation. Minjin noticed everything, of course, because Minjin was the kind of person who made a hobby of noticing things about the people he cared about. He noticed that Jiwoo had started arriving at the library early. He noticed that a novel appeared on Jiwoo's desk, a real novel, not a study guide, and that Jiwoo had recommended it to Sora, writing a note inside the front cover directing her to page 40-7. He noticed that when Sora laughed at something across the classroom, Jiwoo's gaze moved to find her before he could stop it. He said nothing about any of this. He simply bought Jiwoo a coffee one afternoon and told him that Park Sora was remarkable. Jiwoo said the study arrangement was working. Minjin said yes, and smiled at his coffee cup, and left it there. Minjin had his own battle being fought, quietly, at the edges of everything else. He had been composing music since he was 15, piano pieces, then arrangements, then full compositions that he recorded on his phone at midnight when his family was asleep. He had submitted one of those compositions to a national youth arts competition under a name that was almost but not quite his own. He had made it to the finals. The finals were on the same weekend as the school's final mock exam. He had not told his parents, who wanted him in law school, who had built their plans around a particular version of their son's future, did not know that their son was also, very quietly, someone else entirely. He sat with this knowledge for weeks, and then he went to Jiwoo. He told him about the competition, about the timing, about everything he had been carrying alone. And Jiwoo, who had spent 3 years learning to be precisely what his father needed, looked at his oldest friend and said, "Go to the competition." Minjin said his parents would be angry. Jiwoo said yes. Minjin said it might damage everything. Jiwoo said, very quietly, that he thought Minjin would survive it, and that some things were worth surviving for. There was something in the way he said it, something personal, something that came from a place that had been building for a long time, that told Minjin this was not just advice about a music competition. Meanwhile, across the school, Han Yuna had been watching. Yuna had been ranked second for 2 years. She had spent those 2 years working toward first with the focused dedication of someone who has decided that wanting something enough would eventually make it happen. She was sharp and composed and precise, and she had never once asked Jiwoo for help, because asking felt, to Yuna, like admitting something she was not ready to admit. She stopped Sora in the hallway one afternoon and said, with precision and without cruelty, that she was simply making sure Sora understood the situation clearly. Jiwoo had never studied with anyone, In 3 years. And Sora had been here 5 weeks. Sora listened. She said it was a study arrangement. She held Yuna's gaze without looking away. Yuna left, and Sora watched her go, not with anger, but with something quieter and more complicated, the recognition of someone who understands what it looks like to want something so much it starts to hurt. The director called Sora in on a Tuesday. His office was all glass and achievement plaques in the particular atmosphere of a room where power makes itself comfortable. He sat across from her and said her improvement had been noted. Then he said, in the careful way of someone who knows exactly what they are doing, that his son's national ranking had declined since their study arrangement began, that Jiwoo was distracted, that she should consider whether the arrangement was truly benefiting him or benefiting only herself. Sora sat very still. She told him, with the steadiness of someone who has spent 18 years learning to be steady in rooms that want her to be small, that the decline had begun before their sessions. According to the monthly data, she offered to provide the comparative numbers. He called her sharp. Then he asked her to think carefully about where her priorities lay. She walked out of his office and stood in the hallway with her hands shaking slightly in her pockets. And she breathed. And she thought about her mother at home and the medical bills on the kitchen counter and the scholarship that was not yet guaranteed. And she made the most painful kind of practical decision. The next day she did not come to the study session. Jiwoo waited 15 minutes. He read the same paragraph 4 times. Then he went to find her. She was in the school garden, pretending to review notes. The garden was the one quiet space in Hanson High that did not smell of textbooks and ambition. There were actual trees, an old stone bench, a small fountain that no one had turned off for the season yet. It was, in its modest way, beautiful. She told him she had thought it better to study independently for a while, and he looked at her across the distance between them and said, quietly, "What did he say to you?" It was not quite a question. She tried to explain. She said the scholarship, the performance bond, his father's ability to challenge her eligibility. She said she was being practical. She said he had taught her that. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, very quietly, that he had taught her exam strategy. He had not taught her to disappear when things became complicated. That was something she had learned from somewhere else. He left, and she sat in the garden with her open notebook in her lap, the words on the page blurring slightly, not reading any of it. Today's passed. The school felt different in those 2 days. Heavier, somehow, like the air before rain. And then Yuna sat down across from Sora in the library, uninvited, unexpected. She said she had heard about the director's meeting. She said he had done it before, to Jiwoo's last tutor, to anyone who disrupted the machine. She said she was not Jiwoo's friend, she was his competition. But she had watched him for 2 years and she knew what it looked like when he actually saw someone, and he saw Sora. And the math was obvious. Asterisk. Then Yuna picked up her bag and left, and Sora sat with that for a long time. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being told by your competitor that you matter to someone who has not yet told you himself. It sits uncomfortably. It asks you questions you were not ready to answer. Sora thought about the jacket folded on the chair, the coffee she had not asked about, the novel with the page 47 note, the way he had said, without looking at her, that he had come to the convenience store because he did not want to be apart from her the night before the exam. She thought the night before the final mock exam. Sora was closing up the convenience store when the door opened at 10:30 and Kim Jiwoo walked in a plain gray hoodie with no uniform and no rank plaque and nothing to mark him as anything except a boy who had come somewhere on purpose. He sat at the small customer table in the corner. She finished her shift. She came and sat across from him. The store was quiet around them, the lights low, the city outside doing what cities do at night, carrying on, indifferent and alive. He said he did not want to be his father's ranking. She said she knew. He said he wanted to study literature at university, not business, not economics, literature. He had wanted it since he was 13 and he had never told anyone because in his family it was not a real ambition. He said he was telling her now. She looked at him across the small table in the closed convenience store, with the rain beginning against the windows, and she said, "That is who you are," and something in the way she said it, not as a consolation, not as a gentle correction, just as a simple statement of fact, reached through every wall he had spent years constructing and landed somewhere real. She apologized for walking away. She said she had been scared, and that was not a reason, and she should not have. He said she had been protecting herself. She said he sounded like her. He said, almost smiling, terrible influence. He asked her to study with him until midnight. She asked if he had come all the way to a convenience store to study. He looked at her across the table and said he had come because he did not want to spend the night before the most important exam of their lives being apart from her, and also to study. She laughed. And then she opened her notebook. They studied until midnight in the closed store with the rain outside and his novel open on the side of the table and her color coding spreading across 3 pages. And it was the most natural thing in the world. To people at a small table, preparing for the most consequential day of their academic lives. And somehow the weight of it felt lighter for being shared. The exam hall the next morning was silent in the specific way of rooms where a great deal depends on what happens in the next 3 hours. Students filed in, took their seats, set down their pencils with the careful movements of people who are trying very hard not to think about what they are feeling. Sora sat down and looked at her worn notebook one last time. All the colors, all the why questions, all the pages she had filled since arriving at this school with nothing but a transfer form and a decision. Then she put it in her bag. She did not need it anymore. It was already inside her. Across the hall, Jiwoo found her with his eyes. She gave him one small nod. He returned it. The exams were placed face down on the desks. Someone at the front said, "You may begin." 3 hours. Sora moved through each section the way she had taught herself to move, not by memorizing the answer but by understanding the question, asking why before she asked how, trusting the structure she had built not in the last 3 weeks but in the 18 years before them. Every formula she had argued with, every concept she had stayed up past midnight to understand from the inside out. It was all there. Jiwoo worked with his characteristic precision. But on section 8, on a literature inference question, he paused. He looked at the passage, and instead of calculating the safest answer, the one most likely to match the examiner's rubric, he wrote what he actually thought, what the passage actually meant to him, in his own honest reading of it, as someone who loved literature, had been pretending for years that he did not. He stared at his answer for a moment. Then he moved on. The results came 1 week later. The school gymnasium was full, students and parents and teachers all assembled. The tension in the room particular and specific, the kind that only exists when a number is about to be assigned to a person and everyone knows that number will be remembered. The school rankings loaded first. Jiwoo, number 1. Yuna, number 2. The room absorbed this with the quiet satisfaction of things turning out as expected. And then the national rankings began. Name by name, descending from 10th place. The room was very quiet. 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th. Sora stood in the crowd, very still. Minjin was on one side of her, Jiwoo on the other. She was not breathing quite normally. She did not think anyone could tell. 6th, 5th, 4th. Minjin grabbed her arm. 3rd place, Park Sora, Hansun High School. For a moment there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just Sora looking at her own name on the screen. Her name in 3rd place nationally. Her name exactly where she needed it to be. After everything, after all of it. After every 4 in the morning alarm and every shift at the convenience store and every evening she had spent understanding why before she allowed herself to memorize how. And then Minjin was shouting, actually shouting, in a school gymnasium, completely unable to help himself, throwing an arm around her with the uncomplicated joy of a person who is genuinely happy for someone else. Teacher Beck closed his eyes for a long moment with a small quiet smile that said everything he could not professionally say out loud. Yuna, across the room, looked at the board and after a moment gave a single nod. Genuine, earned, offered without grace, but without cruelty either. An acknowledgement from one serious person to another. Sora looked at Jiwoo. He was already looking at her, and he was smiling, not the ghost of a smile, not the almost smile that had been appearing in fragments for weeks. A real, full, and guarded smile, the kind that had clearly been waiting a long time to exist on his face, the kind that made him look like the person he actually was. Underneath the number, he said, quietly, only for her, that he had told her, she said, laughing and crying at the same time in the way that only happens when something you worked very hard for actually comes true, that he had been right, and that he should not make a habit of it. That afternoon, Jiwoo went to his father's office. He placed the national results on the desk. His father looked at them. He said Jiwoo had held 1st place nationally and that he was satisfied. And Jiwoo said he wanted to study literature at SNU. The office went very quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. He said he was not asking. He said he had maintained 1st place in this school for 3 years, had carried the Kim Academy name with everything his father had ever required of him, and he was telling his father now. Not his rank, not his score, not his value to an institution, telling him as a son to a father what he had always wanted and what he intended to pursue. He said he would like, for once, to be heard, not as an achievement, as a person. The silence stretched. What his father said. We do not know. What matters is what Jiwoo's face looked like when he walked out of that office. Not triumphant, not destroyed, but steady, present, like someone who has finally said the true thing and is learning, for the first time, to live in the air after it. The story does not end there. Stories like this one do not end in offices with difficult fathers, or exam results or scholarship notifications. They end, if they end at all, in the quiet moments after the library. 30 days later, the Sunung was over. The banners had come down. Students walked the hallways at a different pace, lighter, like people who have put down something very heavy and have not quite decided what to do with their empty hands. Minjin had gone to the music competition. He had played his composition in front of 500 people in a concert hall in Seoul, and his hands had not shaken once. His parents had come. His mother had cried. His father, who had not spoken for an hour the night Minjin told him, had come and watched and at the end had said, quietly, that he had not known his son could do something like that. It was not a complete resolution. Families are not resolvable in a single evening, but it was a beginning, which is all any of them were asking for. Sora was at the library table, the same table, always the same table, which was by now so thoroughly theirs that other students had simply stopped sitting there, as if it had been formally designated. Her notebook was open, but she was drawing in the margins, stars, formulas, small flowers that had no academic value whatsoever. She was drawing because she wanted to, because it was a Tuesday afternoon and the sun was coming through the library windows, and there was no exam coming and no shift for 2 more hours, and she had, for the first time in longer than she could remember, a little time that belonged only to herself. Jiwoo sat across from her with an actual novel in his hands, not a study guide, not a practice exam, a novel, read in the middle of the afternoon for no reason except that he wanted to. The same novel he had given her, with the note on page 40-7. She asked what he was reading. He said he was checking if she was right about page 40-7. She said she was always right. He read for a moment. Then he said she was right. She grinned, asterisk. And they sat in the library in the late afternoon light, the two of them at their table, the city humming outside the windows, the pressure finally gone, one drawing, in her margins and one reading, something beautiful for no other reason than that it was beautiful, and the silence between them was the easiest thing in the world. She asked if they would still study together at university. Different departments, different buildings, same city, he said, without looking up from his book. That he thought they would do considerably more than study. She looked up. He turned a page. The picture of calm. She threw an eraser at him. He caught it, placed it carefully on his side of the table, and smiled. The real one. The one she had worked very hard and unknowingly to earn. The one that belonged only to this table. This hour. This specific and irreplaceable afternoon. Outside the window, the last autumn leaves were falling. The graduation banner had gone up overnight. Inside, in a corner of the library that had become, over the course of one semester, the most important square meters either of them had ever occupied. 2 people sat at a small table with a novel and a notebook and the rest of their lives opening up ahead of them. This is what it looks like. Sometimes, when the pressure finally lifts, not fireworks, not speeches, not the dramatic rival of everything you worked for all at once, just 2 people at a table, a book, a smile, the afternoon light, the world outside, patient and full of possibility, waiting for them to be ready. Sora had come to Seoul for a scholarship. She had found that too. 3rd place nationally. Full funding, her mother's treatments covered. The future she had built one calculation at a time, finally standing solidly under her feet. But she had also found something she had not budgeted for, something that did not appear in any exam and could not be measured to decimal places and had absolutely nothing to do with where you stand in a ranking. She had found the boy behind the number. The one who loved literature and had forgotten it, the one who kept a dried flower pressed between exam notes, the one who had driven to a convenience store at 10:30 at night not to study, but simply to not be apart, and Jiwoo, who had spent 3 years being exactly what the world required of him, had found something too, not permission. He had not needed permission, only courage. He had found the courage, in the particular form of a girl who asked why before she accepted how, to be who he actually was. There is a school in the heart of Seoul that measures everything. It will go on measuring, as schools like that do, ranking and ordering and assigning numbers to people who are so much more than any number. But somewhere inside that school, on a Tuesday afternoon in November, two people sat at a corner table with a novel and a notebook, drawing stars in the margins, and they were, very simply and completely, free. And that is, in the end, what all the pressure was always pointing toward. Not the rank, not the score, not the name on the board. Just this, just them, just a quiet, certain knowledge that wherever the next chapter takes them, they will face it, as they faced everything else, together, asterisk.